All right. Good evening, and thank you for joining us for tonight's presentation, Culturally Significant Plants in Bandelier National Monument. Before we get started, I wanted to make everyone aware that this presentation is indeed being recorded. You'll be able to find it on YouTube in the next 2 weeks. I am Kristen O'Hara, Director of Programs at the Pajarito Environmental Education Center, or PEAK, as we like to call it, in Los Alamos, New Mexico. I will be the moderator for tonight's talk. PEAK is the nonprofit organization that operates the Los Alamos Nature Center. Visit our website, peaknature.org, to learn more about the Nature Center and upcoming programs. We are able to, of course, offer programming like this because of our wonderful members, donors, and partners, such as Bandelier National Monument. So I'd like to send a special shout out to you for your generous support. To learn more details about becoming a PEAK member or donor, visit our website, peaknature.org. Or if you're in person today, grab a brochure on your way out. Okay, so this is just a few logistics before we get started. This is a hybrid program. So our presenter will be taking questions via Zoom chat and from our in-person audience. For those of you watching from home, you can find the chat feature on Zoom app menu bar. Type your questions to me, the PEAK moderator, in the chat window anytime during this presentation. And I will read them out loud via microphone during our Q&A, which is at the end of the presentation. Please remember that not everyone in the room here with us has a microphone. So there may be a delay when we are listening to a question from a live audience member. Don't worry, we'll be back in a second and we'll try our best to repeat the question for everyone to hear. Lastly, after this talk, you will receive a short evaluation. Please, pretty please, take a moment to fill that out. Your input helps us, tripping on words, helps us improve future programs. And that's it for me. I'm going to go ahead and transfer this over to Miles, and they will begin their presentation, and I will monitor the chat for your questions. Miles, take it away.
Thank you, Kristen. Hello and welcome everyone to the Culturally Significant Plants of Bandelier National Monument presentation. I'm really excited to talk about all of the plants that we have currently that are native in Bandelier. We will be talking about some non-native plants that are also culturally significant but are no longer found in the monument. And yeah, let's start off with a brief introduction. My name is Miles Campos. I am a biology technician. I have been working at Bandelier since August of 2024. And before that, I was working at Joshua Tree for about 2 years. I have an interest in botany, especially where it intersects with cultural resources and wildlife. I also have a really immense respect and appreciation for the natural world and feel a sense of obligation to do work that benefits it. I come from Vaqueros in Zacatecas in Mexico and Cowboys from Miles City in Montana. And my last name, Campos, means field in Spanish, so maybe it's fitting that I work with plants. But I have some pretty big cowboy-shaped boots to fill. I'm immensely thankful for my fellow coworkers and friends here at Bandelier National Monument, and I will miss them when my time here is concluded. To start off, my background is not in cultural resources, but these are the main references that I used to create this presentation. That includes Wild Plants of the Pueblo Province by Dunmeyer and Tierney and Native American Ethnobotany by Mormon. And I would highly recommend you check these out if ethnobotany piques your interest and you want to learn more about the uses of every single plant that you see around you. So how can we tell if plants were cultivated or used by ancestral pueblos? The primary ways that we tell are through oral histories told by elders, archaeological sites, groundstone analysis, so that's matates and manos. Those are smooth stones that have been used to grind seeds and flowers, or seeds and grains. Residue analysis, so that'll be ceramics and the foods that they carried. And pollen analysis studies, which are really cool, from sediment cores, which show a peak different peaks over time in biodiversity, where experts can infer that human activity caused certain plants to be more abundant or diverse in a certain area. So one of the points I want to go over today is that everything has a use. A lot of people tend to be pretty plant blind, but by getting more familiar with plants, we can really build a relationship with them and the land, and we can um, benefit from that knowledge, and we can do what we can to benefit the plants and do what we need to help them thrive. Here are just a few of the native plants that we have in Bandelier. Um, can I get a show of hands? Do any of you see plants that you recognize in this photo? Almost everyone. Very nice. So another point that I want to go over is landscapes as a cultural resource. When we think of cultural resources, we might imagine kivas or cavates, lithic scatters, things that are physical and non-living, that were very obviously manipulated by humans. But vegetation communities are not as apparent that they've been influenced by humans. So it takes a little bit of knowledge and a bit of a discerning eye to be able to tell or infer that an area has been influenced by ancestral pueblos. Um, and that can look like more of a specific species next to field houses, for example. And by understanding or getting more acquainted with the flora, we can gather more context about cultural resources and improve our understanding so that we can better protect those sites. Um, before we go into all of the plants and their uses, I think it's really important. Speaking of protecting land, it's my job to inform everyone here about foraging ethics, laws, and safety. Because while it can be really exciting and fun to forage for plants for your own personal use, there are some best practices that will benefit the environment and everyone else who would like to try foraging as a way to connect with nature. First off, we're going to start with laws. Unfortunately, it is not legal to forage in Bandelier, so please do not try that. We'll go over some resources so that everyone here can find really accessible areas nearby to go foraging in. There's a saying that goes, take only photos and leave only footprints on the trail. Um, and that's kind of the golden rule whenever it comes to National Park Service land. You also want to do research ahead of time and make sure you're not collecting from threatened, endangered, or rare species, because that is also an issue. Foraging ethics, the best practice is between 5 and 10%, and no more than 25%. Avoid collecting from individual plants that only have one or a couple fruiting bodies because you could be reducing the biodiversity of that plant by removing their genes from the seed bank. And also, you have to keep in mind that all living things are connected in nature, and by foraging for these plants, it is possible to impact the wildlife that depend on them to survive. Last, we're going to go over foraging safety, which is definitely something I really want to put a lot of emphasis on. Kota is one of the plants we'll be going over today, and it's also very similar to poison hemlock. One is used as a medicinal plant, and the other is highly poisonous and even deadly. So it's really important that we understand exactly what we're looking for, that we have reference photos, and that we understand that it's possible to have allergies to certain foods that you've never tried before. Um, and none of this is meant to be taken as medical advice or recommendations to uh, or endorsements to consume these plants. Um, and if you do go foraging, I think it's a really good idea to bring someone who is much more experienced with you, um, just as a precaution. Um, yeah. So here are some resources to find places to forage. I recommend the Forest Service and BLM lands. You can just look up BLM national data, and that'll pull up a map that you can go to find really good sources to camp or rock hound or go foraging. The U.S. Forest Service is also a really good resource, and I left the links here. You're welcome to take photos, or you could ask me at the end of the presentation to go back if you need it. Really quick, I wanted to introduce a pop quiz. Let's say that we have 4 plants because it's an even number. And we have one fruiting body on one of those plants. Um, I want to know by a show of hands who thinks that it would be okay to collect just the one fruit because there are 4 plants, and that would be 25%. No hands. I didn't get you with that one. You're right. This would be taking all of the next generation basically from this population, even though only one plant is fruiting. What about this one, where all of the plants are fruiting, but they only have one fruit on each plant? I'm seeing a lot of head shakes. That works too. No, that's also a really good guess because uh, even though it's within the allotted 25% quote unquote best practice guidelines, it would be removing that genetic biodiversity from that individual or of whichever plant you chose. Let's say that we have a bunch of fruiting bodies on a bunch of different plants. Could we hypothetically collect from these? We can nod to. Yes, absolutely. You and your buddy can go collect, and that'll be within the 5 to 10% range. And the next generation is healthy and gets to live on to the next season. So now we'll finally go over the different types of cultural uses for plants. Now that you guys are all experts in foraging. Um, Food and beverage, medicine, smoking and chewing, construction, coloring, tanning, arts and crafts. I know that one's a bit loaded, but we'll get to that. Cordage, fiber and fine matting, implements, and multiple, meaning multiple uses. Almost all of these have multiple uses. I think that's really important to emphasize because depending on how the plant is used, depending on where which part of the plant is used or how old or young it is, it can change the qualities of the plant so that it can be used in different ways. Um, and yeah, so the one we'll probably spend most of our time on is food and beverage, because agriculture was and is really important to Tewa speaking peoples. Um, I also wanted to go over a bunch of different cultural influences from Tewa speaking peoples in the area because we have over 20, or we consult with 23 associated tribes, and um, Tewa speaking people's cultural celebrations and festivals are deeply rooted in natural cycles, especially agriculture and seasonal changes. Um, and these celebrations serve to bring the community together and preserve culture, tradition, and language. So if you think about something in your life that you could compare that to, I would say it's like a holiday, like having tamales at Christmas with your family or making tamales together. So the point of that, sorry, was to emphasize that all of these foods I'm going, or all of these plants I'm going to be going over have different uses, and different pueblos will have different uses that they have um, reported in those publications. So one pueblo might use a food in a different way, another um, might, yeah, there's just a lot of diversity in how plants are used based on the pueblos. Um, so going with sweet food and beverage, we have quite a few actually. We have choke cherry, raspberries, we have grapes, strawberries, lemon berries, and we have opuntia or uh, cactus fruit. And fun fact, the strawberries used to be considered a treat. I mean, most of these are because their seasons are so short and they're usually not found in abundance, and they most certainly were not as large as the strawberries you would see in the supermarket today. We have other food and beverage, including pinyon pine, which is really, really popular to this day. Um, the majority of Tewa-speaking people's diets included corn, squash, and beans. Um, and different types of preparation included grinding them into flour, boiling or roasting grains, boiling or stewing legumes, um, boiling, stewing, or roasting vegetables, and eating fruits fresh or dried. Again, we see the matate and the mano. Food was stored in these ceramic pots, and on the right we see a traditional orno, which is an outdoor oven. So, in an arid environment like New Mexico, agriculture is especially important. Farming innovations by indigenous peoples here have been noted, including waffle or grid farming, which conserves water, um, which is a really scarce resource here. So when it rains, the area collects the water and diverts it to where it needs it, to the plant. Um, while they're not super easily identified, culturally significant plants have been shaped through generations of human cohabitation with the land. Briefly, I want to talk about the three sisters, the story of which is not really mine to tell, but I want to say that corn, beans, and squash are crops that really complement one another pretty well. This combination is significant not just because of its sustainability, but because of the cultural significance and story that accompanies these crops, which um, exemplifies the resilience and the interconnectedness um, of Tewa people's um, culture. Um, so the reason that corn, beans, and squash are commonly planted together are because beans climb the corn stalks while depositing nitrogen in the soil, or um, they attract bacteria that fix the nitrogen to the nodules on their roots. And the corn uses that nitrogen, and they climb together, so they're stronger together. And the squash covers a lot of ground to protect the corn and beans from competition with other plants while providing shade and cover to retain moisture. Both the corn and the beans provide support for one another, as I said. And this type of gardening is extremely sustainable compared to modern Western agriculture, which utilizes monoculture and nitrogen-based fertilizers. So we have chewing and smoking, which can be recreational or cultural. Um, that includes tobacco, um, which is notably different than commercial tobacco. It's considered sacred, and its use may or may not include smoking. It can be also used in smudging or ceremonial practices. We have the common reed, which was vegetation used to create pipes, but other materials were also used, including stone. And we have tree sap, which was used for chewing, and it's sweetest in late summer or early spring. Um, fun fact about the native people used to use spiles to tap the sap and it would pour out into a container. The water freezes on top of the sap, which makes pouring the sap a lot easier. That sap can then be later processed by boiling it to remove any extra water, and then you have a really nutritious food in the winter. So at Bandelier, we have a garden that's using traditional techniques that's available for any visitor to come and appreciate the Three Sisters and other cultural plants. In the past, I believe that this was established in 2019, and you can see some of the beans and the squash that are growing on the bottom right. Um, it is by Juniper Campground if anyone is interested in checking it out. It's pretty cool. We did just start. We have some seedlings that are growing, and yeah, I'm wishing them well. So we have construction. Plants are really important for construction because ponderosa was used to make ladders, vigas, or cross beams. It was used for roof support, as you can see in the top left. Um, we also have cattail, which was used as lathing or support over cross beams. And that was for the the mud or adobe to be piled on top. Um, and then we also have four-winged saltbush, which is really abundant, and that was used whole as caulking to cover the roofs of adobes and make them watertight. We have indicator plants, which when I first learned about these, I was really interested because not only can the presence of these plants indicate there is a cultural site, but the absence of certain plants can indicate that there are certain like buried rooms, for example. Um, so on the left, we have Descarania, or one of our mustards, and these can tolerate high clay content in the soil, and so they're often found in pretty culturally active sites. Any plant that can tolerate a high clay content, including a lot of invasive plants, also do pretty well in disturbed sites like culturally um, significant sites. The absence of certain species like broom snakeweed or snake broomweed. I'm maybe mixing that up, but the absence of Gutierrezia is actually indicative of a um, a cultural site. And we also have Lycium as an indicator, and we also have Cylindropuntia. Cylindropuntia on the right could be a food source, or it could be used as walls. And it also tends to be higher in abundance in areas that are culturally significant. Next, we're going to go over medicinal plants, and I just want to reemphasize that none of this is meant to be taken as advice or a diagnosis or treatment. A lot of the species here might share the same names, same common names as other plants, or they might look really similar despite having completely different chemical properties. So always be careful with this. Maybe consult a doctor before trying any of these medicinal plants. So here are examples of ailments treated with culturally significant plants. There are quite a lot on there. We'll only be exploring a few. Um, I just wanted to give a visual on how extensive all of the treatments were. They're pretty sophisticated, and this is not even covering all of them. So I wanted to go into the actual mechanisms of action for these medicinal plants, starting with OSHA. So OSHA has coumarin, which is a vitamin K inhibitor. Vitamin K causes your blood to clot, so it'll prevent blood clotting. Um, and I also wanted to include on some of them just a little like warning that it's also moderately toxic to the liver and kidneys. We have Kota, or Thelesperma longipes, and it contains flavonoids, including luteolin. which is also found in parsley and thyme, and it has antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties, which is pretty cool. Um, Joint fir or ephedra. Um, it's it contains pseudoephedrins. Southwestern plants don't really have ephedrine, which is kind of what's more commonly used in modern medicine, but it does have pseudoephedrine, which is an active ingredient in some commercial decongestants. And it also contains other alkaloids, including tannin. We also have aspen, which the bark contains salicylates or salicylates, which are which it has in common with willow, and this kind of acts as an aspirin, so it's a blood thinner. Um, we have Jimson weed, which contains scopolamine, which is highly toxic. The processed powder from specific parts of the plant were used as an anesthetic as well. Um, and we have yucca, which is rich in saponins, making it an effective ingredient in soap. And on the top left, I have a clematis, which also is high in saponins, which would also make it a pretty um, effective soap. Next, we're going to go into cordage, fiber, and fine matting. We have yucca leaves, which were soaked and then hit with a hammer to leave strong fibers. The fibers were then braided together to create cord. And cord is pretty important because it carries everything that you need. You can use it around pottery. You can use it to carry things long distances. And cattail was also used to make woven sleeping mats combined with yucca fiber. Bear grass is also something that was common and practical for a quick basket. It was first woven into a mat and then tied to a stick, bent into a circle. Usually that would mean that they have to use something like willow, which is really flexible. Next, we're going over to implements, which are basically tools that are used in everyday life. We are starting with chokecherry, which was notably, oh, excuse me, that's meant to say robinium or New Mexico locust, which was also used to make bows along with chokecherry. Apache plume or snake broomweed were both used to create cleaning tools such as brooms. Douglas fir was used to make prayer sticks. Side oats grama was noted to make brushes. And several woody species were used to make trays, tool handles, bow arrow shafts, and spear throwers, which are called atlatls. Um, Last, we're going to go over arts, crafts, and tanning. Um, we have a few different plants that are used as paint. Lichen is not a plant, but it also was mixed with resin from pinyon pine to produce a deep yellow color. Rocky Mountain bee plant. The leaves were used to create a yellowish green dye, and the stems were used to produce a black dye, which was used to paint ceramics. Whenever it was fired or glazed in the fire, it turned into like an ashy gray color. And then we have mountain mahogany or Sarcocarpus, which had its roots used for red dye. Alder is another plant or another tree that was used to make red dye. Or sorry, alnus. Um, and helianthus or sunflowers were used as decoration on dresses during dances and were woven into hair or worn in hats. Rasps, or one of the many instruments that Native people created, were usually made from bones, but occasionally were made from wood to produce a rattle or a maraca type sound. Flutes were commonly carved out of wood, any of the woody species that we have here. Um, and host drums, the drum skin was usually made out of deer skin, but the bass also was made out of wood, and the cordage may have been used from braided yucca fibers. Oh, another thing about yucca fibers, they could also have been braided with human hair or animal hair to create very dainty braids that were then used as decoration on their clothing. We see a gourd here that I have not mentioned. That's because it's a non-native. But a lot of trade was happening, or a lot of trade has happened between pueblos, and there is a specific species of gourd that is not native to Bandelier or found in the park today that was that had thicker skin and therefore dried better whenever they would make those into rattles, which again, another musical instrument. Um, so we have a lot of um, threats to our cultural plants, I would say, that we are working to address. There was an FCA report that came out about the suitable habitat in Bandelier um, for culturally significant plants in 2024. And um, in this, it basically cited higher severity fires and floods, invasive plants, human disturbance, and shifting long-term weather trends as um, basically the main threats that need to be addressed to preserve cultural plants. Um, and to address those, we're incorporating prescribed burns to minimize future fire severity, removing invasive plants, and promoting native plant health by removing that competition. Um, and we're trying to educate and prevent human disturbance. For example, people picking flowers. I don't think that that's out of any kind of malicious intent. I think that people just want to connect with the nature that they may not um, spend a lot of time consciously interacting with. And I think that all we need to do is inform them on where it's legal to forage and encourage them to check out different or discover different ways that they can connect to plants. Um, we also want to promote leave no trace principles and encourage everyone to consider native plant gardening. Um, So to address shifting long-term weather trends, we don't have a nursery at Bandelier, but we do collect seeds to do future outplanting. Mainly this is in our most disturbed sites like parking lots or like the parking lot of Sankowi or on the Fry Trail. Um, Alrighty. Um, so to conclude, I wanted to just wrap up by saying that the ancestral Puebloan use of plants demonstrates an advanced understanding of the mechanisms and the interconnectedness of the natural world and humans' roles in it. The sophisticated agricultural systems that they established and relied on allowed them to thrive and not just survive in a desert environment. So I think that that's pretty cool. There's a lot to learn from Indigenous people's relationship to the land, including how we can live more harmoniously with it. Um, and I hope that this presentation has inspired you all to get out there and appreciate plants in a new way because everything has a use. Um, yeah, thank you. I'll now be taking any questions.
I have a couple just to get things started. Do you have any? So I know that you mentioned the books in the very beginning, but are there any other plant ID guides that you would suggest people look into if they were interested in this subject?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Flora Neo-Mexicana is probably the best book to use locally. I know that there's like a Flora of North America, but that's a jumping off point, but I wouldn't rely on it. Um, especially whenever we're thinking about things that are visually similar, like OSHA and poison hemlock.
Got it. Thank you. And I understand that the national park system cannot um, condone picking of plants like this, but but do you do plant ID walks ever?
Yes. Anna Casillas Branson, who's in the audience, actually did a plant walk during Pollinator Week. And I bet that she has some more. She says, just call me
She says, just call her.
anytime, she says.
Do you work at the national park or the national monument? Okay, awesome. So they do indeed. Peak also does plant ID walks, but I not necessarily within this wheelhouse. Okay, and my other question is, if people wanted to continue learning, what do you suggest they do
If you want to continue learning
on this subject?
about this subject, I would highly recommend both of the books. The Native American ethnobotany book is quite a lot more comprehensive than the Wild Plants of the Pueblo Province, but again, it's about the scope of what you want to dig into. I think Wild Plants of the Pueblo Province is a great place to start locally, and get the Native American ethnobotany book as you kind of branch out. Um, Other than that, experience is the best teacher. I think that you should also really look into learning from Native people. They are going to be the best resources on this subject. And like I said, this covers historic use, but Native people have knowledge on the current uses that they have, and they may know much more about things like dose of which medicinal plants you're supposed to have or how you're supposed to safely prepare it. So seek that information out, and support Native communities who are offering this knowledge to you. So the question was, are there edible mushrooms on the monument? And also a comment that I had not mentioned mushrooms. Um, I actually, because I work with plants, but mushrooms are not within the scope of my regular work. There are mushrooms and there are edible mushrooms in the monument and also surrounding areas, including BLM and Forest Service land, that I'm not personally an expert on them, but I will say that I would practice special caution when foraging for mushrooms. Again, I think following all of the same safety practices is a good idea. Go with someone who's much more experienced, do your research, grab a book or several books, especially ones that are local or, yeah, that are particular uh, to your area. And keep in mind that even if it's safe to eat, you might end up having an allergy. So just practice caution with everything.
I will say that those that are interested in mushroom hunting in particular, there is the New Mexico Mycological Society that you don't have to be a member to attend some of their programs, and they have forays um, like once a year, like in September ish. Don't quote me on that, but they do have them, and that's a good opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I am absolutely certain that plants were used as, or parts of vegetation were used to create painting implements, but I don't have specific information on which plants were used. Um, yeah. conclusion, or yeah.
And I know there's also so just last question for me.
Yeah.
I know there's interest in growing plants similar to the ones that you have talked about, like Datura and Coda, within people's yards. Do you know places that people can turn to get those plants?
Plants of the Southwest is a really good resource. Sorry, I was remembering the yeah, you can look up Plants of the Southwest and they sell seeds there. That's a really good resource to buy seed native plants seeds for your gardens.
Okay, if we're done with questions, let me just check Zoom really quick. It looks like there's no questions on Zoom, which is fine. I think we're just gonna end it then. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
doing this presentation and sharing your knowledge. And if anyone is interested, we have lots and lots of different programs. And remember to fill out your evaluations. Thank you so much. Everyone have a good evening. Thank you so much, Miles.